of a Gooner. Like and subscribe. Chronicles of a Gooner. Harry Symeou time. Arsenal. Come on, you Gunners. Arsenal. Chronicles of a Gooner.
Hey people, and welcome back to another episode of the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, your host, Harry Symeou. Hope you're all having a wonderful week so far. We're well and truly in the thick of the international break at the moment, which can be quite difficult to navigate. I always feel like when you end that period before the international break with a disappointing result, and I know that we've discussed the draw at Sunderland and we've talked about the fact that it isn't the end of the world and it wasn't the worst result in the world and all the rest of it. You still feel a little bit underwhelmed and you still, I think, get into this mode whereby you just want to see the team go out and put it right. And you want that to happen as soon as possible. But the international break prevents that from being the case. And so you have to wait quite a while, don't you, to see Arsenal back in action. And all the while, you're worrying about fitness. You're worrying about players going on international duty and picking up injuries. You're worried about players potentially being unavailable upon their return because of something that is completely out of your hands, from which you just don't benefit. And you're looking at and relying on a set of games that in most cases means absolutely nothing to you. That's how I feel anyway. On today's episode, we're going to bring you up to speed with some of the latest injury news because there is yet another Arsenal injury concern. So we'll bring you up to speed with that, give you all the details, give you all the information. And then we're going to do what we originally set out to do today, which is to review Arsenal's summer signings so far. So we're going to work our way through them. But I just want to introduce the format to you guys so you understand how we're doing this and how we're going to go about it. And I'd love you guys to play along in the live chat box as well. So put your ratings in the chat box as we're going, as we're discussing. That will be great. I'd love to hear from you guys. I'm always interested in getting your opinions. But basically, the way we're going to do it is we're going to, first of all, look at the sample size, because I think that's really, really important. There'll be some players whose sample size is very, very small. And you could argue too small to draw any sort of definitive conclusions. So I want to do the sample size piece first on each of the players that we're going to cover, because I think that provides a pretext to the conversation that we then go on to have. We're going to talk about their performance versus what the expectation was. Then I'm going to share with you guys what I think they could do better. So we'll touch on some what are, in my opinion, development areas. And then we'll wrap up on each player with a rating out of 10. So that's the plan for today's pod. That's how we're going to go about rating the players and ranking them. And so when we get to the end and I've given them all the ratings, we'll rank them in terms of best summer signings so far based on that ranking, based on that rating, I beg your pardon. That will then build those rankings up for us. So we're going to do that in just a few minutes. But before we do that, I want to bring you up to speed with some of the latest Arsenal injury news. Now, according to reports, now the tweet I'm about to share, or the X post I'm about to share on the screen, is not the original source, but I think it's done a very good job. It's one of those aggregator accounts, but it's done a very good job of summarizing the story. So I figured this would be the one I'll share with you. So let's have a look then at what exactly is happening. So Riccardo Calafiori, apparently after the Sunderland game, was complaining of some sort of hip injury. Arsenal had already informed Italy that Calafiori was dealing with a hip injury, but the national team still called him up to check his condition for themselves. See, I don't like stuff like this, because what it is basically a football federation, in this case, the Italian Football Federation, saying to Arsenal Football Club, essentially, whether they did it this directly or this abruptly or not, I don't know. But it's essentially them saying, we don't believe you. We're going to bring Ricky in so that we can have a look ourselves. After some tests, he couldn't train and has been ruled out of Italy's first game against Moldova. The injury isn't serious, but both Arsenal and Italy want to be careful and give him the sufficient time to heal properly. So I suppose from an Italy perspective, they're looking at it and going, okay, He can't make this game, but he might be able to make the second one in the international break. And that's why it's worthwhile having him here and keeping him here. But from an Arsenal point of view, you just want him back, don't you? I feel like, we've talked a lot about Lewis Skelly recently, and we've talked about what's going on with him in England and the fact that he needs more minutes and he needs more game time. Lewis Skelly was outstanding last season, but the fact that nobody's up in arms about him not playing as regularly as he would like at the start of this season says so much. It says so much about the performances that Riccardo Calafiori's put in. We finally have had an opportunity to see the player that we signed and over a period of time. And you always worry with him because you always feel like an injury is just around the corner. And we've done a really good job, I think, of, managing him and protecting him, whether that be in game by making changes and bringing him off the pitch a little bit earlier before he gets into that, what they call the red zone these days. But also, in some of the Champions League games, for instance, he's not played. Marvellous Lewis Skelly's been given the nod, and that's not really impacted us or affected our level. But I just think Riccardo Calafiori, in terms of what he brings as a defender, but also what he brings from an offensive point of view, has become a really, really important part of the team this season. And just when you think we're in the clear with regards to his patchy injury record, you get a bit of news like this, which strikes the fear of God into you, right? Whether you think it's serious or not, and I have to go by the reports that we're reading because I don't know any different. But, any injury, any niggle, any knock, you worry, don't you, when it comes to Riccardo Calafiori. So we'll be keeping a close eye on that one and how it goes over the next few days. But he is with the Italian national side. He isn't going to play against Moldova, but he could play in their second game of the international break. So we've got to keep our eyes peeled on that one. Hopefully common sense will prevail. Hopefully the decision will be taken not to risk him, because listen, this is potentially a very big player for Italy. He was already a big player for Italy. That's why we signed him in a lot of ways. So yeah, I want him to be protected, be looked after with bigger and better things in mind in the not too distant future. So yeah, let's see how that's going to go. Right, let's begin then, shall we, with our summer signing ratings, because I think this is going to be interesting. This is going to cause debate. This is going to cause discussion. And as I said already, I want you guys to play along in the live chat. I'd love to hear from you. Before we dive into that, though, if I could quickly remind you, because I'll forget once I get into the flow of things, if you haven't done so already and you're with us on YouTube, leave a like on the video. It really, really does help. Subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't done so already. And if you're watching this back on playback, go down to the bottom and hype the video. Yes, that's really important nowadays, apparently. If you're listening to us on Apple or on Spotify, please do leave us a review. And even if you've left us a review in the past, could you please try do it again? Because as I mentioned before, when we migrated from one podcast platform to another, we lost a fair amount of our Apple reviews. They seem to have been lost in transition somewhere. I can't get a straight answer out of anyone with regards to how I kind of merge those. I can only delete one set of them, and I don't want to do that. I'm reluctant. I'm hoping that this miracle solution is going to present itself. But yeah, it means whatever we do, however we sort of proceed forward, we've lost a bunch of reviews, and reviews are obviously really, really important. They make the podcast more discoverable to those that maybe haven't listened or haven't come across it before. So reviews are really, really important on both Apple and on Spotify as well. Okay, without further ado, then let's get into, shall we, our Arsenal summer signing reviews. And we're going to start with what's probably the easiest one, I would say, because I think his performances have been very good. I think most people have been impressed with him. I think that the consensus around him is a positive one. And I think Martín Zubimendi could be the guy that we are looking at come the end of the season and saying was the best signing of the lot. And value is important here as well. So we're talking about the 26-year-old who joined the club in the summer, of course, from Real Sociedad. It was a deal that was in the pipeline for a long time. It was a deal that, looked, I think, quite difficult to do if you go back a year or so, because it felt like he was headed to Liverpool. That didn't quite work out. It was said that the timing wasn't quite right, but you expected Liverpool to revisit that and to potentially do that deal the following summer. Instead, Arsenal got in there somewhere along the line and convinced the player that Emirates Stadium was the best place for him. So, here he is, and I think he's impressed. If we have a look at his stats, I think that's important. And I mentioned that we're going to do sample size. It is important that we highlight the numbers in terms of games played and minutes played and stuff, because the more we've seen of someone, the more accurate our analysis, I think, is going to be, right? Versus the analysis on someone like Cristhian Norgaard, who we're going to come on to in a bit, but who we haven't seen a huge amount of. So 11 appearances in the Premier League, 2 goals and 1 assist for Martín Zubimendi. Now, those 2 goals came in the same game, of course, so that paints a little bit of a slightly skewed picture. Probably should have scored at Sunderland as well when he saw his effort come crashing back off the bar. He's also made 3 appearances in the Champions League, yet to feature in the Carabao Cup, but that means 14 appearances so far for Martín Zubimendi, 2 goals and an assist. I wasn't expecting goals and assists from Martín Zubimendi. The odd assist, yes, because he is playing in that midfield and he will be someone that we're looking at to progress the ball forward, move it through the lines, etc., etc. But those were not the things that he was brought in to do first and foremost. So when you've got some numbers on the board in that sense, that is a bonus for me. If I think about expectation versus performance, for me, Martín Zubimendi has exceeded my expectations. I knew that technically he'd be fine. I knew that he'd be capable of dictating tempo. I knew that he'd be capable of breaking lines with his passing. What I didn't know was whether he could cope with the game physically, whether he would be quick enough across the ground, strong enough and powerful enough to hold his own in the middle of the park, in what is undoubtedly the most physical league in terms of top flight leagues on the planet. That was my concern about Martín Zubimendi. And I said repeatedly during the summer that in order for us to get the most out of him, we would probably need to just adjust Declan Rice's role. And doing that would see us get the best out of both of them, really, because I think Declan Rice is more of an all-rounder. We've talked about that many, many times before, rather than being this guy that you leave high up the pitch. And so you get both sides of his game, the offensive and the defensive, which is obviously when he's at his best. But also Zubimendi needed, I think, someone to help him settle in and to fit in, and someone to protect him against some of his weaknesses. And every player has weaknesses. Nobody's flawless, right? So when I say weaknesses, or when I say development areas, which we're going to come on to in a minute, I don't think that should be taken as a negative. It's not a stick to beat these guys with. That's not the way we're looking at it. But I just think Martín Zubimendi has been sensational. And when he's not played, I think we've really kind of felt the difference. The sample size is pretty good here. Performance versus expectation, he's absolutely outdone it in terms of my expectations of him. I know there'll be others that said, nope, I knew what Zubimendi was all about and I was expecting this, and it's just basically par. It's what I was hoping for. It's what I thought we were going to get. I would say that he's done more. I'm going to give Martín Zubimendi so far an 8 out of 10 in terms of my rating. When it comes to development areas, I think this is interesting. I'm going to highlight something that Martín Zubimendi himself has said, because I think this falls in line with what I believe his development area is. And it is about moving the ball through the lines just that little bit quicker. Just doing it as soon as it's on, rather than having that tiki-taka mentality that he would have been brought up on in Spain and also will apply when he plays for the national team, whereby it's possession, 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 control, control, control. Arsenal are a side that like to control. We've talked about that a lot. Okay, they like to control all aspects and all elements of the game. But sometimes I think you need to take risks earlier, and you need to look to thread the ball forward as soon as it's on. Because if you don't, you allow people to get back behind the ball. You allow people to get back in shape. You don't take advantage of people pressing you or anything like that. And you end up in a situation where you're coming up against well set up teams all of the time. And we get games where there are just long periods in which both sides cancel each other out. And that is an issue in the Premier League right now. But I think one of the ways that you counteract that, one of the ways you fight back against that, is as soon as you win the ball back in midfield, you move it forward. And you move it forward directly and quickly. I think he's done more of that at Arsenal than he probably did at Real Sociedad, and that will be to do with the styles of the teams and the league that he's playing in and all the rest of it. But I still think there's more to come in that sense from Martín Zubimendi. So I'm going to give him a solid 8 out of 10. Let's go back to the defense then and talk about the players that we've brought in defensively. And we're going to start off with Cristhian Mosquera, who, of course, arrived in the summer, 21 years old, from Valencia. He's played 7 times in the Premier League so far this season, and he's played 3 times in the UEFA Champions League. He's also made 2 appearances in the Carabao Cup. So you're talking 5 plus 7. You're talking 12 appearances across the board for him so far. Okay. Sample size is good. It's a strong sample size. Performance versus expectation. Wow. Wow. Not in my wildest dreams did I think that Cristhian Mosquera would look as ready as he does to just come in at centre-back and fill that role. And when he was signed and when we were linked with him, I thought, well, you go and get him. He's a young player. He's developing. He's on the right path. And you bring him in, but you know that you could play White or Timber at centre-back. You know that you got Calafiori there. At the time we had Jakub Kivior as well. And I thought he comes in with sort of a sort of bright future ahead of him, and it's about nurturing him. But right now he's probably not ready and probably wouldn't be selected over any of those sort of centre-back turn full-back options that I've just mentioned. But then he's massively outperformed what my expectation of him was. And now he is the go-to guy. After Gabriel and Saliba, he is the go-to guy. And to be that at 21 years old, just 12 games into sort of your time at a new club, a bigger club, a club where there's more scrutiny, a club where there is more pressure, to be that at this age, I just think is remarkable. And I really do think the sky's the limit for this guy. I think he could be as good as Gabriel or Saliba in a few years' time. I'm not saying he's there yet. But based on the early evidence, there's no reason to believe anything other than Cristhian Mosquera can go on and he can, really develop into one of the best centre-halves in world football, which is exactly what William Saliba and Gabriel have become at Arsenal. So, yeah, he's massively overperformed in terms of what my expectation was. Development areas, I think he reminds me a little bit of Gabriel when he first arrived, in that at times he can just be a little bit rash. And sometimes, I'm not saying that you don't want your centre-backs to play with urgency. I think you do. I think you want them to defend with urgency, defend with sort of sharp instincts, but you also want them to be able to kind of be good and assured in possession as well, because I think in a team that likes to progress the ball through the lines, or that at least seeks to do that, it's very easy to give the ball to your centre-half from the goalkeeper early. And because of his sort of desperation, if you like, to move the ball forward and do what you've asked, they can play loose and silly passes without scanning the pitch in front of them, without really understanding what the bigger picture looks like. And that can put you in trouble. So I think with Cristhian Mosquera, I want to see that balance between just that calmness that you need to be a top defender and that you need in possession, but also that urgency to move it through the lines that little bit quicker without that turning into rashness. And I think that's where Mosquera could do better. He could just improve in terms of that balance with regards to the way that he approaches the game. So Mosquera, for me, look, if I've given Zubimendi an 8 out of 10 and I had high expectations for Zubimendi, he's overperformed in terms of what I was expecting, but I don't think he's overperformed as much as Mosquera. So when I put the overperformance thing into this mix here, and when I really kind of, look into the Cristhian Mosquera case in the criteria that I've explained, I think the overperformance has been so high. And the thing that I've talked about him developing on in terms of just getting that balance between urgency and calmness, I think that's something that just naturally comes with age. He's 21 years old, for God's sake. So I think the overperformance in terms of the expectation for Cristhian Mosquera means that I can't give him anything less than a 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10 for me, because I think he's been that good. That good. Just having a quick look at some of your comments on this. Juan Lewis says, Mosquera will probably get a 7, but I think closer to a strong 6. Really, I'm giving him 9. I'm giving him a 9. Zach says Mosquera is an 8 out of 10, given the expectation prior to the transfer. Ben says he is Gabriel's future replacement. Steve says Mosquera, I beg your pardon, has been really excited about the future. Minimum 7 from me. Have I been over generous in giving him the 9 out of 10? It seems I have, based on you guys' ratings, but I've been super impressed with him. Jason says Mosquera gets a 6.5 for me. As low as that. He says really promising start, but clearly needs to be developed. But I'm very comfortable with him being our backup centre back. So you've been complimentary. You're just being stingier with your ratings than I am. All right, let's talk Kepa, shall we? Kepa Arrizabalaga, brought in the summer, and the 31-year-old is very much the second choice goalkeeper at Arsenal, right? We know that. There wasn't a huge amount of expectation around him because there wasn't a huge expectation that he would play much. And when we talk about sample size, I think that I was just reading it. I got distracted by a comment there. It's someone preempting what I'm going to say about certain players. Let's get there first, guys. Come on, chill. But I think with Kepa was the reason that when I sat down this morning and thought a little bit about this podcast and how we were going to do it, because I didn't want it to just be blanket ratings, because I don't think you can do that without applying the context that we need to. But with Kepa, I put the sample size factor in because of him, because I look at the sample size and it's tiny. And how the hell am I supposed to make a judgment on Kepa Arrizabalaga when he's barely kicked the ball? Like, it's not fair to sit here and write him off or criticize him or anything like that. So I don't really want to do that. I don't know why this page isn't loading properly, by the way. He's made 2 EFL Cup appearances. He's kept 2 clean sheets in those EFL Cup games, which is obviously very, very positive. But their games, you know, the Port Vale game was one that we were expected to win, and obviously Brighton at home, you know, keeping a clean sheet is good, but it's not amazing or something that's going to really impact or push up his rating. So look, I looked at this and I thought, sample size wise, it's probably just not fair to give Kepa Arrizabalaga a rating whatsoever. My default rating that I hand out to players that either haven't been on the pitch long enough when I'm doing match ratings, or just, you know, haven't had things go their way in terms of being able to impact the game, is a 6. So I'm just going to give Kepa a default 6. But, you know, if you want to put an NA next to Kepa Arrizabalaга's name, that is absolutely fine as well. So, yeah, look, Jason's hit the nail on the head there. Kepa gets a standard score, like a sub who comes on in the 88th minute to see off a game. Yeah, that's absolutely right, I think. So that's how I've done that. Let's look at Piero Hincapie. 23-year-old Ecuadorian, of course, brought in from Bayer Leverkusen. Very small sample size again, just 2 Premier League appearances, 2 Champions League appearances, 2 League Cup appearances, also made appearances in the Bundesliga. Well, I think this page is glitching, by the way, in terms of the stats. So let's just do it this way in terms of, where are we? 25, 26, all competitions. Let's filter it that way because that front page isn't working properly for whatever reason. It's not changing the numbers as I'm moving along. So 5 appearances in total for the Arsenal, 2 in the Premier League. He's played a total of 26 minutes. He's played 2 times in the Champions League for us, total of 74 minutes. And he has played once in the EFL Cup for 70 minutes. So again, sample size really, really small. You're talking about a guy who's played, 26 plus 74 plus 70, a total of 170 minutes in an Arsenal shirt. With Hincapie, though, my expectation levels are really high, because whenever I'd seen him for Bayer Leverkusen, I was really, really impressed. Each and every time I'd watched him play, I thought he was one of the best players on the pitch. And for that reason, when we signed him, I thought he's going to come in and he's going to actually take that left back spot. That's what I thought. I thought, right, And I was obviously wrong. But at the point we were discussing Hincapié in the summer, I was kind of like, well, why are we bringing this guy in? And what are we bringing this guy in for? Are we bringing him in to come in as an additional centre back? And that was before I think we'd realised what a talent we have on our hands in Cristhian Mosquera. I think it was before Arsenal realised what a talent they have on their hands in Cristhian Mosquera. Like, you can do all the scouting in the world and you can think you know a player inside out, but until you get him on the training ground working with you day in, day out, until you thrust him into those situations in the Premier League and in the Champions League, it's very, very difficult to make a strong judgment, right? I think Hincapié was signed not just to be a left back, but to be centre back covered too. And I think that's why Arsenal were happy to do the deal that they did. It looks like we're going to end up paying 50 odd million pounds for him, but that will be after this loan spell, because it's an initial loan, comes to an end. I don't think this is a deal that Arsenal would have done if they couldn't get it done on the right terms. I think the terms were really, really important here, in that this was perhaps not an essential signing, but one that Arsenal quite liked. And having done all the business that they did already, they felt that if the circumstances were right and things worked out, they were more than happy to have him. But they weren't going to break the bank to do it. It wasn't a priority. If it was, they would have done it at the start of the window, and they would have been working on it from the start of the window. Now, I'm not saying they weren't mindful of him or sort of considering it or having those conversations in the background, because we don't know. But it was the last bit of business. It was a bit of business that nobody really saw coming, because I don't think people really thought it was a desperate need. And remember, Jakub Kivior departed on loan in order for that deal to happen. If he doesn't, then he stays. Hincapié doesn't come. And I don't think anybody's massively disappointed with that or disappointed at all. But I do think Hincapié is an upgrade. Again, sample size is tiny, so very, very difficult. His performances so far have underwhelmed me a little bit. Just a little bit, not a lot. I'm not overreacting here. But I put that down to him catching up fitness-wise, catching up settling in, etc., etc. So with Hincapié, I'm going to do exactly what I did with Kepa Arrizabalaga, and I'm going to give him the standard rating of 6 out of 10. But the sample size, I think, is problematic here in terms of giving this rating, because I need more. I need to see more. I need to understand more. And when I do, I think I'll have a better idea of what sort of player he is. Zach says versatile, but was probably purchased as a backup centre-back. Yeah, and I think the centre-back element is really, really important. I think when we brought him in, a lot of people were like, left-back, this is the left-back. But then you look at the way Calafiori's made that position his own, the fact that Miles Lewis-Skelly's waiting in the wings as well. And then you think, well, was it worth then going and essentially agreeing a deal like we have for Piero Hincapie and letting Jakub Kivior go if Hincapié was coming in as a left-back? No, I think he's coming in predominantly as a centre-back, but obviously has that ability to play at left-back, and I'm sure he will feature there from time to time. Put it this way, he is a more Mikel Arteta type left back option than Miles Lewis-Skelly is, just in terms of theory. Okay, Lewis-Skelly's done great, but Lewis-Skelly inverts in the way that a lot of the others don't. And Capier's left-footed and a bit more of a player that will go on the outside, I think, if sort of given the opportunity to go forward, a bit like Calafiori. They both can invert, but they like to go on the outside as well, and they give you that variety. Whereas for me, Lewis-Skelly always wants to invert because that's what his natural inclination is as a midfield player. So, yeah, I think Hincapié will be a good signing for us. I think it will turn out well. But right now, I see him as a backup centre-back and someone who is still finding his feet at Arsenal. Samuel gives him a 6. Steve says he looks good with the little minutes he's played. Another default 6 with potential to be much higher come the season's end. Completely agree. Kevin Donnelly says, on a real note, if he starts playing more regularly at left back, what happens to Miles Lewis-Skelly? His minutes look reduced even more. Will we see his position moved, or will he change clubs? That's something that I can't answer because I just don't know. At this moment in time, as far as I understand it, Miles Lewis-Skelly's not worried. Obviously, he prefers to play than not play, but we're not at a stage where he's considering his future, as far as I understand it. So for that reason, I'll rule out the changing of club bit. But I like the idea of him potentially changing positions, because I do still think that in that midfield area, we are a little bit light. And I also think, and some people will disagree with this, but I really strongly believe this. I think he's got a higher upside as a midfield player, given his age, his skill set, all the rest of it, when you factor everything in, than Cristhian Norgaard does. Cristhian Norgaard wasn't a signing made for the long term. I think it would be foolish to dismiss the role that Miles Lewis-Skelly can play in the middle of the park. That's not to say that he's just going to flick a switch and become a midfield player. Obviously, he's broken into senior football playing as a left back, and that means that he's going to have to adapt and adjust if he's going to go into that central midfield role, because it's one thing ghosting in there and drifting in there as the spare man, and it's another thing being the guy responsible for that area of the pitch. So I think that's going to require further development, but I think he's got the intelligence to do it. I think he's got the technical level to do it. And perhaps more importantly than any of that, I think he's got the confidence to do it. He really does believe in himself, Miles Lewis-Skelly. So I don't think he'll be giving up on his Arsenal dream just yet. I don't think Arsenal have any intention of moving him on. But I can see a world in which Hincapie plays more at left back than he does at centre back, barring an injury. And so your point, Kevin, is in my view completely valid. I just don't know how this plays out. And I also don't think we should obsess about the future. I also don't think we should sit here and sort of worry or be anxious about how that's going to go, because there are going to be injuries. There are going to be opportunities for everyone. And I just think that it's one of those things that might just naturally take care of itself. So that's where I'm at on that one. But yeah, just to wrap up on the Hincapie section, he gets the 6 out of 10 rating from me. Oh my God, someone in the chat said I've given fair ratings. Bloody hell. I normally get slaughtered whenever I do ratings or anything like that. Anyway, look, we're going to take a really, really brief pause, and I promise it'll be super brief, like 10 seconds. Don't go anywhere. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me, Harry Symeou. Make sure, if you're with us on YouTube, that you leave a like on the video, that you subscribe to the channel if you are brand new. And if you're listening to us on Apple or Spotify, guys, please do leave us a review. That really, really does help. Also, you can check us out on Patreon too. If you're interested, you can become a Chronicles of a Gooner patron for just £3 a month. That's less than the price of a cup of coffee. It helps me as a freelancer to dedicate more of my time to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast, rather than going out and doing other things that are far less enjoyable. So that helps me in that sense. It also gives you access to additional bonus content, as well as giving you access to every single episode that we record completely ad-free. You also become part of the Patreon family, which means that you can message each other. You can message in the chat that we have on the Patreon app. And yeah, why not? Look, £3 a month. It's less than the price of a cup of coffee. No obligation, obviously. But if you feel like supporting and just getting that little bit more involved, you can do so that way. And I'd really, really appreciate it. The link is, of course, in the description. Right, short break, and we'll be back to continue with our ratings.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
That's right. You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner podcast with me. Like and subscribe. Right, let's move on to Cristhian Norgaard, shall we? Danish midfield player brought in from Brentford in the summer. Really good value in terms of the price. I think Arsenal paid something like £10 million to take a Premier League captain away from his existing club, which is pretty good going, isn't it? But again, a lot like some of the other players that we've talked about, the sample size isn't big. It's not big at all. And that is making it quite difficult to draw conclusions when it comes to Cristhian Norgaard. He's featured for just 14 minutes in the Premier League so far, across the 2 appearances that he's made. He's played 108 minutes, so just over a game essentially, in 3 Champions League appearances. And he's played twice in the League Cup, and he played 90 minutes in both of those games. So 7 appearances overall for Cristhian Norgaard. Sample size very small, very difficult to draw conclusions on that basis. But what I will say is this. My expectation of Cristhian Norgaard wasn't very high. You will remember when we signed him, me having a little bit of a kind of minor meltdown, if you want to call it that. And that was in part because I don't think that Cristhian Norgaard is a top tier player. I think he can do a job as a squad player. And at the time, I was a little bit concerned about the overall and general state of our midfield, because at the point that we were bringing in Cristhian Norgaard, or that we were first linked at least, there was still the possibility of Arsenal keeping Thomas Partey. Now, at that point, we didn't know he was going to be charged. We didn't know any of that. There was speculation, and the speculation was rife, but we didn't know for certain. All we knew was that Arsenal were losing Partey, were losing Jorginho, and were bringing in Norgaard potentially, along with Zubimendi, whom I've already expressed I had some reservations about as well. So this signing, when I first heard of it, I was underwhelmed. I was disappointed. I'm not going to lie. The more I thought about it, and the more it became apparent and clear that his role would be one as a squad player, I thought, okay, for that money, it makes sense. You go ahead and you do it. But with my expectations being quite low, I can't now sit here and slate Cristhian Norgaard, nor would I, because I don't think his performances warrant that or justify that. The thing with Cristhian Norgaard is that I think he's one of those players, right, that in a team like Brentford, he stands out because he's quite a good all-rounder. Like, he can play as a DM, and he can break up play, and he can win the ball back, and he's quite physical, and he's quite mobile. He's had a few injury problems since arriving at Arsenal, which hasn't been ideal. But generally speaking, because the sample size is so small, you have to look at Cristhian Norgaard through the lens of what he was at Brentford, because we haven't got much more to go by since he's arrived at Arsenal. But he's one of those players that I always feel is a bit of a, and this is going to go down badly, I know. I see him as a bit of a jack of all trades, but a kind of master of none. And I think in certain teams and at a certain level, that's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine. But when you get to this level, you need to be a top ball progressor. Not sure he is. I looked at some of the clips that were going around, and I looked back at these this morning when we were when I was sitting down thinking about today's pod. And I remember sort of people saying, and we did a scouting video over on Patreon. There's a little cheeky plug for the Patreon page. And one of the things we kept seeing from Cristhian Norgaard was him getting on the ball, deep line midfield position for Brentford, and playing these long passes forward. And people were sort of saying, yeah, oh man, like the passing range is unbelievable. And I've watched them back again. And I'm not saying he's a bad passer, because again, I'm not saying he's bad at anything. I'm not saying he's bad. I'm just saying that he's not top level. And I looked at a lot of those passes, and a lot of them were channel passes. Hit the ball into a channel, hit the ball into a space, and let the runners do the rest. And I just think at a team like Arsenal, where you face low blocks all the time, where there's rarely spacing behind the opposition, where you need to be a bit cuter, where you need to be a bit more accurate in everything you do, I think Cristhian Norgaard versus someone like Martín Zubimendi falls down a little bit. But equally, my expectation of Cristhian Norgaard was not huge. So it would be wrong of me to sit here and give him a crap rating, because I think that he's just showing what, in my opinion, he is. Development areas for me, for Cristhian Norgaard, I mean, fitness. You got to stay fit. And I know you can't always look at the player and say it's because of you, or sort of point the finger or blame them for not being at the fitness level that they should be, because things happen, shit happens, right? That's football for you. That's life for you. But I think for me, I don't look, because my expectation of Cristhian Norgaard is not huge. I don't look at any sort of one aspect of his game and think, yeah, that's where you need to improve. I think he's at a decent level across the board, all rounder. I think that's why Mikel wanted him. I think that's why Arsenal signed him. But I think if he can stay fit and he can be more available and he can backfill more than he has done so far, that would significantly raise my opinion on him with regards to his suitability to the role that he is playing. So Cristhian Norgaard, for me, okay, I'm going to give him, and this might surprise people, I'm not going to give him the standard 6 out of 10 that we gave to Kepa and Hincapie. I'm going to give him slightly more. I'm going to give him 6.5 out of 10 because I think the fact that I've established in my own mind what Cristhian Norgaard is makes me feel more comfortable now with the role that he plays in this squad. And although the expectation levels weren't very high, he's not played much. And so that has obviously, impacted things a little bit. But that's where I'm going with. That's where I'm going. I'm going with 6.5 on Cristhian Norgaard. Let's see what you guys are saying in the live chat. There's a few 6.5s for Cristhian Norgaard. Andy says he's a solid shield. On the ball, he's a little bit limited, but he's reliable, tactically seasoned for the price, and seeing out games, he's excellent to have. Imagine being able to take off Eze and bringing him on. I wish we brought Cristhian Norgaard on at Sunderland. Like, he was on the bench that day, right? Let me make sure I'm not talking complete and utter nonsense here, because I'm trying to think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he was. If I go back to last Saturday's game, 8th of November, hold on a second. This is going to bug me. I want to make sure that I've got this right. But I remember something I said in the aftermath of that game. Yeah, he was on the bench. He should have come on against Sunderland to give us a foothold physically and bring fresh legs to the picture. Steve says Norgaard's start with Arsenal was not the best due to injury. Since his return, he's shown that unfortunately he will remain a bench warmer. Okay, interesting. 5 from me, says Steve. Title says Norgaard is starstruck. He's 31, living his life. Jid says, so Harry, are you saying Arteta and Arsenal didn't know what they were doing signing him because they didn't see what you saw about his passing? You're just making things up now to justify rubbish. To be honest, he has not given anyone any reason to think he is not good enough. Okay, so this is where, and Jid is a dear listener and someone who I respect because he always puts his opinions out there. And there's a lot of people that will criticize yours, but that will never give theirs or engage in these types of debates. Now, listen, I respect you. I appreciate what you're saying. But one of the things that you do very, very often, and I have to say this, is you misinterpret what I've said, and you've done it again here. In fact, this might be the clearest example of that. You say, and I'll repeat your comment for those listening. So, Harry, are you saying Arteta and Arsenal didn't know what they were doing signing him because they didn't see what you saw about his passing? At no point in this conversation have I discussed Mikel Arteta and what Mikel Arteta or Arsenal saw. I'm giving you my ratings. When we were linked with him and when it became apparent that we were moving forward with a deal for Cristhian Norgaard, I didn't give you Mikel Arteta's opinion. I didn't give you Andrea Berta's opinion. I didn't give you Dave from the pub's opinion. I gave you my opinion because that's what I do here. And my opinion was that it was a slightly underwhelming signing. My opinion was that he was a decent all-rounder. And I probably thought, as I've just alluded to, that he was a better ball progressor than he actually is. Because now that I've gone back and looked at it and reflected on it, and this is why I'm not an analyst at a top football club, I felt he was hitting channels. And that was made to look like, obviously, as it is in compilations, someone that could progress the ball to a far higher standard than he can. I'm not making things up. I'm giving you my opinion. And because you don't agree with it, you start to say things like I am, sort of manipulating what I'm saying with each passing week. My opinion on Cristhian Norgaard hasn't changed. I still think Cristhian Norgaard is a decent but not great player. I still think he's a squad player and nothing more than that. Obviously, that's what Arsenal and Arteta think he is as well. His role so far tells you that. And if you want to come back at me and say, but he's not had the fitness and there's a small sample size, again, something that we factored in to our rating of 6.5 out of 10, I would say to you that I will bet you good money, we can do a charity bet if you want, that Cristhian Norgaard only ever is a squad player in this Arsenal team, barring a huge injury crisis. So I don't think it's outrageous what I've said. I don't think it's outrageous at all. I think you're misconstruing what I'm saying. Jid says, okay, then at some point, when you have a phone-in show, I would like to articulate what the issues are, because you like to use this whole misinterpreting what I'm saying thing as a shield. All right, do you know what, Jid? Do you know what? Are you on Instagram or X or any of those platforms? Because I can't DM you on YouTube. If you are, and I'm sure you will be on one of those, right? Drop me a message. Drop me a message and let's sit down. And I'm happy to do this with anyone that has strong opinions, that wants to discuss, that wants to challenge, that wants to push back, and that is respectful in doing so. And Jid, you know, we don't agree, but you are respectful, and I will never say otherwise. Hit me up, send me a message. Let's sit down. Let's record a conversation. Let's record a conversation about this, and we can put it out as a podcast. No problem. Drop me a message, and we'll do it at a time that works for us both. Rather than me organizing a phone in and then maybe it doesn't work with your diary or schedule as well. So let's do it. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk Noni Madueke now. Okay, another one for whom my expectations weren't that high. Again, a bit like Cristhian Norgaard, I think my personal opinion on him and his level was probably taken out of context by some people, because they seem to think that I was saying that he was a completely crap player, and that was never my opinion. My view at the time was partly based on my view on Noni Madueke and his past and his career to date, but it was also to do with the fact that at that point I just did not see how that made any sense whatsoever. Like in terms of the bigger picture, what we needed to spend, you know, the other areas that needed improving. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. So my expectations around Madueke were quite low. Sample size on Madueke is quite low, but not as low as some of the others. So I think for me, he just about falls into the category whereby I can give him a rating that I'm quite confident in. Norgaard's sample size, obviously small. You know, Hincapie's small, Kepa's basically non-existent. With Madueke, he's got 6 appearances, 5 in the Premier League, 1 in the Champions League, but he's played significant minutes. I feel like he's played nearly 400 minutes in an Arsenal shirt. Again, I appreciate that it's not the biggest sample size in the world, but I feel like I'm in a place where I can give a rating here, so I'm going to do that. On Madueke, I think he's a dribbler. I think he's a ball carrier. I think he's someone that likes to beat his man, happy to go inside or outside. And I thought in the absence of Saka during that point, it was great to have him in the team. I also think that Madueke can do a very good job on the left. It's a different job to the jobs that Trossard would do or that Martinelli would do. Both of those guys are in excellent form. And so I wonder, you know, what the picture would have looked like had Madueke remained fit. I wonder whether he would have continued playing the volume of minutes that he has, or if that would have changed given the form of the other guys. It's very difficult to say, isn't it? But yeah, I think with Madueke, okay, so my sample size is relatively small. My expectation levels weren't overly high. I do think there's been a bit of overhype around Madueke's performances. I think there was so much negativity when we were linked that people that were maybe on the other end of it, or that are just sort of really kind of loyal to Arsenal and want to back and support people, and that's fine as well. I think they kind of felt a responsibility during that period of time where he was playing to just basically overhype everything that he does, to the point where we were talking about Noni Madueke at points as if he was the second coming of Christ, and he obviously isn't, but he did put in some good performances and he did show some really great stuff at certain points. But I think it was overblown. I think it was blown way out of proportion. I think it was the Nottingham Forest game where I thought he was the best player on the pitch, comfortably. I think it was the Forest game. But again, I look at it and I'm going, all right, 6 appearances. Okay, it's not the end of the world that he hasn't scored, and it's not the end of the world that he hasn't got an assist. But when I consider the level of hype around some of those performances and then look at the output's not there. And that makes me think that the praise and the positivity was overblown a little bit. So with Noni Madueke, I'm going to give him a 7 because he's done better than I thought. He's impacted more than I thought. He's a better player than I'd given him credit for being. But I also caveat that 7, for example, if he carried on another 5 games with the same outputs that we'd seen so far, so if he played another 4 or 5 games and still wasn't scoring, still wasn't assisting, was looking good in other elements, but wasn't really having that influence, that 7 would quickly drop down to a 6 for me. I don't know. I don't know that I can give him any higher than a 7. I've seen someone in the chat say 8. I can't give him an 8. I think 7 is about right for Madueke because he's exceeded my expectations. Sample size is quite small, which can be a bad thing, but it can be a good thing as well, because basically, if you go 6 games without providing any output playing wide for Arsenal, like, I can live with that, but I can't allow that to continue for too much longer while you maintain a rating of 7. Do you see what I mean? So the small sample size in Madueke's case, to a degree, has probably worked in his favor a little bit here. But hopefully he's back soon and we can see more of him. We got 2 players left. How many signings did we make in this summer? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Bloody hell. We have got Eberechi Eze and we've got Viktor Gyökeres still to cover. We're going to take another really, really short pause. Don't go anywhere. Like, subscribe, all the rest of it. Leave us a review. I'll be back in just a second to wrap up with our final 2 players. We're going to do Eberechi Eze and we're going to do Viktor Gyökeres. Don't go anywhere.
You're listening to the Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe.
Welcome back to the show. We are currently rating Arsenal's summer signings so far. Yes, it's early. Yes, they might go on to do amazing things and go down in the history of the club as legends, but they also might flop as well. And we might be looking at them in a very different light. So it could go either way. I appreciate it's early, but it's the international break and we've got to find stuff to talk about. And I feel like this international break, the last one of the year, I think is normally quite a good check-in point because you're 10 games, 11 games in. The league's starting to take shape. You're starting to see patterns and understand things a little bit more. Okay, let's talk about Eberechi Eze at 27 years old. I felt when we signed him that this could be the needle mover. This was the difference for me between Arsenal being reactive in terms of bringing in players that they needed to in the forward line. Gyokeres, centre forward, had to happen, and Madueke, another winger, because we were short of one. But this felt to me like the potential needle mover. This was the signing that said to me, probably above all this summer, that Arsenal was serious. Has he been serious? Well, he's made 15 appearances for Arsenal so far this season. 9 in the Premier League, 1 goal, 2 assists. He's played 4 times in the Champions League. He's got 1 assist in the Champions League. And he's played twice in the EFL Cup with 1 goal to his name. So you're talking 2 goals and 3 assists overall for Eberechi Eze in 15 Arsenal appearances. It's not so much the outputs for me that have left me feeling a little bit underwhelmed with Eberechi Eze. It's how he's been hot and cold in terms of his involvement in matches. So there are some games, Newcastle away is the one that I always go back to, where I just thought, man, like this geezer was phenomenal. You know, he was outstanding. He was brilliant. He did everything right. And he was a constant threat. And then there are other games where I think West Ham at home might be one of them where I felt quite strongly about it. He played 79 minutes that day. I felt it at Fulham as well, where we won 1-0. And I felt it at times against Sunderland too. I feel like Eze, and it might be a tactical thing as well, right? This is where I'm really struggling because I'm struggling to differentiate between I know what he's doing because I can see it with my eyes. He is playing in a traditional 10 position. And that means that when the ball does come to him on the edge of the box, he can get shots off, which is what I want him doing. He can attempt to score goals, which is what I want him doing. He can slip balls in for the forwards, which is what I want him doing. But I want him to be involved in the game more, generally speaking, because I think he's a talented player. And I always think that you should want to get your talented players on the ball as much as possible. Expectation levels were ridiculously high. I thought this was it. I thought this was it, the final piece. This was him making that step up that he's been waiting to make and deserved to make for quite some time. And I thought he was going to come in and he was going to hit the ground running. And I'm not saying he's been bad, but I can't give Eberechi Eze, and the sample size is not a problem here in terms of the amount of games he's played. I can't give him anything more than a 6 out of 10 right now. And if you were to really push me, I might even give him a 5 out of 10. It's too inconsistent for me. Development areas, I've talked about him getting on the ball more. How does he get on the ball more? And this is where that conflict for me in my mind comes. Because there's a part of me that thinks, well, Arsenal are playing differently this season. Arsenal are trying to be more direct with Gyokeres up front. They're trying to hit the channels more, blah, blah, blah. We figured out that last season we had a real problem getting output from our wide players because they were constantly doubled up and at times tripled up on. And so in playing a more traditional number 10, someone who's going to go and get close to the striker, you are essentially leading the opposition down a path whereby they are focusing more on those central areas because we've got an extra body that's constantly there, whereas Odegaard wouldn't always be there. He might arrive there, but it wasn't his starting position. They're now focusing more on stopping us through the middle, but then that what that does is it gives people, like Saka, like Martinelli, like Trossard, a little bit more time and a little bit more room in those wide areas. And that is benefiting us. But that means sacrificing Eze a little bit, because if you say to Eze, go and drift and go and get on the ball, then you take away that constant central threat that is in turn creating spaces for some of the others. But at the same time, I don't know how a 10, and I played as a striker, but I did, as I sort of got a little bit older, drop into a slightly deeper position and play as a second striker. I always wanted to have the ball. And so if you told me go and stand in that central area, tactically I might be doing a job for the team, but I'd find it quite difficult because I'd want to be involved as much as possible. So there's games where I look at Eze and I'm like, just stand 5 yards to the left, 5 yards to the right. Just drift into the half space on this instance, just so you can receive the ball and then you can attack the central area. But there's a part of me that looks at it and goes, well, maybe Mikel's asking him to do that. And maybe that's because as a team, there is a wider benefit to doing that. And when he does get the ball, and it might be less because of the position that he's currently occupying, at least he's in a position where he can score. At least he's in a position where he can do what he does best, which is influence football matches. So I'm torn as to whether me being underwhelmed by Eze so far is because of the tactical role that he is playing, or if it's because he's not performing. I can't quite work that out. I don't know, I've dropped my keys on the floor there. I can't work it out. And so I think 6 is a standard rating. And when I say 6, some people will look at that and they'll say that's a bad rating for a player that we paid that much money for whom there was huge expectation around. I'm still figuring it out. Yeah, let's see. Lots of interesting comments on this one. Zach says, I gave him 5 out of 10, but I will caveat my view with that. I think he'd be better in the left wing role. In addition, the right 8 is also different from the left 8 role. Role is really important. No doubt about that. AJ says, agree, Harry, it could be 5 or 6, but some will say, we were blind and never admit Eze being below expectations. We would blindly say he's been brilliant when he hasn't been. Steadfast Godcast says, agree with you, Harry, but he still assisted against City, which gave us a point and took 2 points off City, and scored the winner against Palace, which has gained us 4 points in total. Yeah, and that's all fair. That's all fair. Quick reminder from Afsar, smash the like button and subscribe if you haven't done so already. We've got one more player to cover, and that is the Gyok. Feed the Gyok, and he will score. 27-year-old Swedish striker came in the summer for relatively big money. 4 goals in the Premier League so far. Let me just bring this up so you guys can see it properly. Hold on. Let me do it all competitions so we can filter out all the rubbish that we don't need. For those of you listening, you're thinking, what is he talking about? I'm talking about the graphic on the screen. Okay, so 14 Arsenal appearances, 6 goals to date. That's just under 1 in 2. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. Like, my expectations around Gyokeres were quite high in that I thought he'd score goals, but I don't think they were as high as other people's. If you go back to the scouting session that we did on the Patreon page, I talked about him being a little bit clunky, about him being a bit of a flat track bully, about his touch not always being amazing. And I said that, aesthetically, that will put people off of him. But I'm looking for effectiveness. I'm looking for efficiency. And to score 6 goals in 14 games, I think is good. It's a good start to life at Arsenal. It's a solid start to life at Arsenal. But I think Viktor Gyökeres' stock has really risen in the weeks that we've been without him. We were without him in the second half against Burnley, and the team played in a totally different way. We've been without him over in Prague. I know the team won comfortably, but we were up against weak opposition. And then at Sunderland, I thought we really missed him as well. The way he stretches people, the way he runs in behind, the way he's constantly on the move, I think is really, really important in terms of pulling people apart and essentially breaking them down and opening them up. I think that if you had asked me this question, if we were recording this podcast prior to his injury, I probably would have given Viktor Gyökeres a 6 out of 10. Now, I'm giving him a 7 out of 10. I still think there's a lot more to come from Viktor Gyökeres. I do. And that gives me encouragement and belief that, come the end of the season, we're going to say he was very impactful and we're going to give him very, very positive and rave reviews. But being without him, as I just think, opened our eyes to what we're missing when he's not in the team. And so for that level, for that reason, I beg your pardon, Viktor Gyökeres for me gets a 7 out of 10. A 7 out of 10. I think there's been chances that he could have taken that he hasn't. I think his finishing hasn't been quite as clinical as I thought it would be. But at the same time, I think also you're playing at a higher level. You're playing in a better league. You're working much harder for the team. You're covering more distance. And I think you can put that poor finishing at points down to him simply being too tired. By the time the ball comes his way, having worked incredibly hard. I know it sounds like a really basic and bog standard bit of analysis, but if anyone's played the game, you know that when you're tired, it does impact on your decision making. It impacts on your ability to execute things from a technical perspective. All of it is impacted by tiredness and fatigue. And I think in an ideal world, he doesn't play as much as he's played so far. You might argue that he doesn't then have 6 goals on the board. Fair enough. But I think with Havertz coming back and us being able to keep Viktor Gyökeres back a little bit so that when we do utilize him and when he does play, he's at peak level, I think that's going to make a big difference. I think that's going to be really, really important. So I think he's suffered a little bit from the injuries that we've had in that position in terms of there being an over-reliance on him. But I think a 7 out of 10 based on all the things that we've been talking about, expectation, performance versus expectation, development areas. I think he could do with taking some more of the chances that come his way. And I think sometimes his touch has got to be a little bit tighter in certain situations. Those are the things that I'd be looking on him to improve. US Arsenal fan says Gyokeres would eat glass for Arteta. I mean, there's no doubt about his desire to come to the club, and he eventually got the move and everybody was delighted with that. It's just going to take a little bit of time, I think, before we see the peak version of him. So 7 out of 10. So let me run through my player ratings for you, and then we'll rank them so you know who's top of the pile and who's sitting at the bottom of the new signings table so far this season. Look, I know these things don't carry much weight. These are just my opinions. Sometimes you get people sort of really taking opinions way too seriously. Number one, in terms of the bigger picture, I think for me so far, it's cost, value, expectation, all of those things. Number one is Mosquera at 9 out of 10. That's my ranking for him. Number two is Zubimendi. And I'm writing these down as I'm saying them because I'm going to revisit these at some point in the season. Okay. In joint third place, we've got Viktor Gyökeres and Noni Madueke. So Gyokeres, 7 out of 10. Madueke, 7 out of 10 too. So they're in joint third, which means we move on to fifth place now. In fifth, it's going to be Cristhian Norgaard. And then in joint sixth position, we're going to have, and again, sample size is a big part of it for two of these players, for Kepa and Hincapie. But for Eze, I just want to see a little bit more. So that is my ranking. So number 1, Mosquera, number 2, Zubimendi, number 3, Gyokeres, joint 3rd is Madueke, 5th is Norgaard, and in joint 6th, we've got Kepa, Hincapie, and Eberechi Eze. Let me know your thoughts on the players in the chat box and in the comment section if you're watching this back on playback. I'd love to hear from you. We'll be back tomorrow with some unpopular Arsenal opinions. If you've got any unpopular Arsenal opinions, chuck them in to the comment section below and I will pick those up on tomorrow's show. It's the international break. We're thinking outside the box. Check us out on Patreon. Like, subscribe, review, all the rest of it. And I'll see you all on the next one. I hope you enjoyed the episode. All the best. Goodbye.
Chronicles of a Gooner. Like and subscribe. Chronicles of a Gooner. Harry Symeou time. Come on, you Gunners.